Talks, the podcast where we dive deep into the journeys of female founders bringing their product-based businesses to retail shelves. I'm your host, Roberta, and today on this episode, I'm sitting down with Clara Sieg, co-founder and CEO of Loonen Water, a brand really rethinking what it means to hydrate. And I feel like hydration is definitely something that's been talked about in the industry. It's growing. There's lots of awareness, and consumers are looking for how can they stay hydrated throughout the day. So I'm excited to hear the story of this brand. We're going to get into the realities of really launching a beverage brand, how to approach differentiation when the aisle is really saturated. So how to really stand out, and strategic thinking behind building a brand that really resonates with buyers and consumers. So great to have you here, Clara. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's kind of start from the beginning. And could you just tell us what was life like before even thinking about starting Luna?
I spent the last 15 years prior to starting Loonen on the investing side, so focused on early stage, mostly consumer investing. And personally, big inspiration for Loonen, and frankly, the need that I identified as a consumer was born from my own pregnancy journey and being a lot more conscientious about what I was putting in and on my body. So on that dimension, also our world has changed dramatically because I now have a 2-year-old daughter.
Nice. Was it just sparked because you were pregnant, or was there like a pivotal moment that kind of changed your thinking about it?
Yeah, so the path to getting pregnant was a lot longer and more complicated than we'd anticipated. And I ended up going through IVF. And in that period of time, that felt, pretty out of control and like I had very little agency. I started focusing on lifestyle interventions that I could do paired with IVF, and learned a lot about endocrine disruptors and plastics and frankly how horrible they are for health, but really studied around their impacts on fertility, largely because, they are endocrine disruptors, right? So they impact the way that hormones work. And in that, I just made changes in our home that felt sustainable and like it wouldn't drive me insane. Because the reality of plastics and these broader class of endocrine disruptors is that they're impossible to completely avoid. And if you try to completely avoid them, you'll drive yourself completely insane.
Yeah.
So how that looks like in our household is from a food perspective, we eat organic, we store it in glass, we don't use nonstick. Beauty and personal care, there are a lot of brands that have informed us around parabens and phthalates and synthetic fragrance and how to avoid those things, basically given us the easy button solution. And then in home cleaning, like we use Branch Basics at home, but there are a number of other companies that stand for that. We also use a lot of vinegar and water. And then you get to the water category, which is the thing you drink the most of, what your body's made of. And it was just really confusing to me. I was reading a lot about the problems with our tap system and started looking for a bottled solution. And there's a lot of plastic and plastic lined aluminum. And the glass set is largely public company dominated or private equity roll up dominated, and very little transparency around what's actually in the water. And I just got kind of obsessed with that and kept looking for a better option. And then when I went back to work, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. I transitioned my daughter from breastfeeding to bottle feeding, and I was super conscientious around the formula that I chose. And then the main ingredient in formula is water when you mix it, right? And for me, I just felt like I was ready to do something that mattered a little bit more. I was deeply passionate about and cared about from a consumer perspective. And I think we have an opportunity to build a real business that stands for something and also solves a pain point.
Yeah. Had you always thought about entrepreneurship? Was this really the catalyst to start thinking differently in regards to what you
I
want
had
to do?
always thought about entrepreneurship and from the perspective of I had been investing in entrepreneurs for 15 years. But I think that seat actually gave me the perspective of like not wanting to do it because you see how hard it is,
Yeah.
right? I think when you're a little bit farther away on a day-to-day basis, you kind of read really sexy headlines and that seems intoxicating and like it must be easy. But when
Hmm.
you're sitting really intimately closely on the sidelines from a capital provision and typically on the board perspective, like you see how hard it is on a day-to-day basis. And
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
like that,
You see
no
the real
thanks.
behind the scenes.
That's on that.
Yeah. So with that, then, starting to really think about starting a brand and kind of going on the other side from what you currently were doing, what was first steps in regards to kind of creating something new?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I took the most from investing and the lesson that I kind of hold closest, and frankly that informs the way that we think about team build is I think the best founders really know what they don't know and embrace that and then hire against it. And so for me, didn't want to do this alone ever at all. And the first step was really finding somebody who had alignment and vision and a really complementary skill set. And I mean that in the true sense of the word. So my co-founder was on the founding team at Spindrift. He led all of their operations for the first decade of the business. He knows how to produce and manufacture great product and has an incredible eye and ability to really focus on quality in our production processes. Turns out, coming from the venture side, that is not something I knew how to do.
Had you known him before?
I had gotten to know him over the years. We had connected like through, I was always looking at companies. He was really a great operator. And he sort of became one of those people that I would call whenever we were looking at a CPG company because he has this unique ability of really in the weeds operations, but also vision and being able to bounce back and forth between those two things. And that I think can be really rare in somebody who is so laser focused on operations where a lot of that job is kind of downside protection.
So you had just called him and said, "Hey, I have a
Yeah, I have
brand to
this
pitch you."
bananas idea, and I'm having postpartum hallucinations of creating a water brand. And we just kept talking and talking, and became more and more convicted around the opportunity. I think he had spent so much time intimately aware of the problems with the linings of aluminum cans, plastic lined, and had real conviction that there was an opportunity and this set. There has not been much innovation in the glass set. There's been a lot of innovation in the broader beverage set, but very limited in the glass set. And I think for good reason, right? Plastic doesn't break, neither does aluminum.
Right.
And so you've seen a ton of growth on that side, very limited innovation in terms of water purity and transparency, and certainly not very much in the glass set because of its weight and its ability to break. But I think if you look at the data over the past 2 years, the glass set has more or less doubled year on year. And it's largely led to the fact that now that we know better, I think a lot of consumers want to do better for their day-to-day health and for their families. And as more and more research comes out around the problems with plastic leaching and the chemicals that can introduce to a product, the more glass becomes a clear alternative.
Yeah. When you thought about really having purity in your water, how did you even find to place a manufacturer of source that could supply what you were looking for?
Yeah, so it was a process of learning and researching and frankly traveling to a lot of places across the US. Our idea was to have a reasonably flexible supply chain that would enable us to always test at the spring. And if the spring stopped meeting our testing standards, we'd move on to a spring that was better suited.
Right.
And we spent about 6 months going all over the US, testing different springs, pouring through historical results. And ultimately, every source had some footnote. And that makes sense, right? We live in a globally connected water system. There are some places that are better than others, but ultimately, stuff exists in our ground and in our ground systems. And all sources are impacted by different weather patterns, surrounding land use, time of the year, etc. And that always changes the profile of the water. So no water profile is necessarily pure forever or unchanging. So with that sort of 6 month exploration process, we came to the conclusion that instead of focusing on just a purification method, which most purified water in the US does, right? They take municipal tap water and then they quote unquote purify it. But some things in water are really intractable. So you think about disinfection byproducts and forever chemicals and stuff like that. It's modern filtration is powerful, but it's not perfect. That stuff is really hard to fully get out of water once it's introduced. And then you think about the sort of spring, natural, artesian well side of things. If you want to market it as that, you're not allowed to do any filtration. So those footnotes that I mentioned exist in the water and they remain in it. So we decided that we wanted to borrow from the way that the World Health Organization recommends you treat water, which is combining the highest quality source with the highest quality filtration practices. And how that comes to life for Loonen is we spring source all of our water and we test it the spring at every production run to make sure it continues to meet our quality standards. We then stainless steel tanker it to our manufacturing facility where we've built out stainless steel piping and physical membrane filtration. So never any chemical intervention. never any plastic piping and never any municipal type piping. And then following our filtration, we remineralize it with the highest quality minerals you can find. So things Celtic sea salt, not refined table salt. And then we only ever put it in glass. And then after we bottled it, we test on a finished goods basis for over 350 different contaminants. So think really anything that we can test for, we try to. So microplastics, forever chemicals, bisphenols, phthalates, herbicides, pesticides, you name it. If we can test for it, we do. And then we try to make that testing really consumable for the consumer. And that was a frustration that I had, was sometimes you could find water quality panels and different test results buried, but like it didn't
Give you
make
full
sense.
transparency.
Well, it wasn't necessarily that it didn't give full transparency. It's just like these are like crazy wackadoodle lab results in some sense that I'm like not a scientist, right? So I didn't want to have that translation. You can QR code from back of label. It takes you right onto site, gives you a breakdown of the things we care about. And then at the end of the page, you can click into our PDF results that show everything that we test for with all of this different lab limits and the stuff that I now understand, try to make it a little bit easier to understand what's in our water and what's not.
Yeah, that's a pretty lengthy process to really make sure that you're having the purest. Was there any challenges in a manufacturer doing all of those steps and like creating that process that probably I would imagine is different than how they ever executed before?
So we own the first parts of our process, and then we partner with an amazing co-man who owns a glass line. I think that was probably the most challenging piece. You know, so much of the US has moved and sort of shuttered glass lines and moved to PET and aluminum because those lines rip way
Mhm.
faster, right?
Yeah,
You can produce like 2,000, 2,500 units really, really quickly versus the average being like 400, 500 on a glass line. And so it makes sense that folks would shift over to that. And so finding manufacturer who can support our scale and our growth that we think is going to be coming, but that also has excellent operations from a glass perspective was kind of the challenging part, but we feel really good about the partner.
yeah. And then how long did it take from you kind of ideating this idea of Lunan to actually having a finished product?
A lot longer than we would have liked.
Yeah.
I
I feel
think
like
the
it
other
usually does.
complication, yeah, the other complication is that I was really obsessive over every detail. So it wasn't just the actual water, it was also the glass mold. A lot of the existing set, like this is seems like such an obvious thing, but the bottles are quite wide at the bottom and so they don't fit in a standard car cup holder. And that drove me bananas because when you're driving and then it's like sloshing around on your passenger seat.
Yeah,
So we created our own custom mold that one fits in your car cup holder.
smart.
Feels really nice in hand. And then the spout's also quite a bit wider than what's normal in industry, in part because it just feels nice to drink from. It feels like you're drinking from a glass, but also because folks are constantly adding greens powders and hydration mixes and stuff like that to their waters. And if you've ever done that to
Mm.
a normal water bottle where you're like trying to
Gets
get it in the
everywhere.
small hole and then you get like the plume of sweet smoke in your face,
Yes.
we wanted that to be easier too.
So you finally got the water sourcing, you identified the glass bottles that you felt were the most, beneficial for a consumer from an end use perspective. What was initial selling? What did that look like for you? Did you start off on D2C?
We did not. No, we started off really regionally focused. So I mentioned I live in the Bay Area. So we're in close to 300 doors here now.
Wow.
We're at SFO. We're on table at like these really amazing restaurants like Flower and Water and Mr. Juice and at coffee shops like Motoring Coffee. I think because our obsessiveness around and consistency of product and the taste of the product. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of is the mineralization that we bring to it that creates just a really clean, crisp sip. Our carbonation is very obsessed over as well. And that really resonates with a lot of retailers and restaurateurs and sort of cafe and coffee shop owners who care deeply about the ingredients that they use across the board and back of house. And and we sort of bring that same attention to detail in the water space.
Yeah. So how did you start to get into those retail stores? What was the mode in which you were able to connect?
We have a distributor in the Bay Area who's an amazing partner called Good Stuff. They've been a real extension of our team as we've attacked this market. And then we've also just like done the work, right? I'd spend at least a day a week going into different grocery stores, visiting with different cafes, dropping samples, doing demos, making sure our merchandising looks good in store, and building relationships with different store managers and the folks who are stocking the aisle. Like a lot of them now know Fiona Bay Area, who's my daughter,
They know you when you
and
come
she
in.
comes with me on the weekends. And everybody on our team has that mentality. I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle for us because, again, this category has long been dominated by much larger companies. And one thing that we can control and differentiate on is the way that we show up and the personal relationships that we're able to foster. And I think, that helps us move product, right?
Yeah.
Like when I'm standing there demoing, it's like, it's
Yeah.
water.
Right. So with that, going into grocery, going into local, what's the story that you tell to get, those buyers to actually pay attention and want to carry the brand, especially just knowing the category and, the competition, the high competition that's in that space?
I think that the glass set has seen very little innovation. Again, for good reason. Like it's hard, it breaks, it's heavy. But there's now an awareness of people wanting to drink from something that is non-leaching. So I think we're able to tell a really good story around transparency, and like it's a really powerful thing to be able to QR code from the back of our label and show really comprehensive test results in a way that you can read on your phone. And a lot of consumers are scanning as they shop. And so that has been helpful. And then I think tasting the water and getting to try the product, I think it's an excellent product and people are willing to take a bet on that. And then it's on us, we get the opportunity to be on shelf, and then it's our job to make sure that it moves.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about pricing? Because I feel like this pricing wise would be considerably higher, I would imagine, versus plastic bottles on shelf.
Versus plastic, yeah, but that's not really who we compete against. We compete about against the other glass players. We're right in line with category. Our MSRP is $3.99, and then we have promotional planning that brings us down to like $2.99 to $3.50 on shelf.
Okay. Was that strategically planned to be competitive with what else was on set within that space?
Never really wanted to build a brand that was absurdly
Yeah.
expensive.
And to your point, like wanting to have access to people as they're now thinking, how can I be more conscious in my everyday? You want to make sure that it's priced appropriately.
So we've done everything we can to keep price point in line with the category. And as we continue to scale, and we hope there are volume gains and some better pricing in some of our inputs like our glass or our corrugate, we'd like to pass that on to the consumer.
So what were early sales? What did that look like when you first started to get into those retail stores?
Our velocities have been really compelling. I think in part because I think this category has stood on marketing jargon for a really long time, right? They ask the consumer to rely on a random geography you don't really know anything about and a picture of a waterfall for a proxy as a proxy for purity. I think people actually care about what's in their water. And I think, the day that you wake up and start thinking more and more about, wait, this is the thing that I drink the most of. There's
Yeah.
no occasion for water because it's literally all day, every day, and even sometimes in the middle of the night if you're
Yeah.
thirsty, right?
Yeah.
To the extent that you're tweaking your wellness stack or like some supplement stack and trying to do all these biohacky things, and then you're not thinking about the base of it all, which is
Mhm.
water. It's a very simple return to the basics. And I think that is resonant.
Yeah. What have you found to be the most successful when just driving awareness of the brand and driving traffic when it comes to retail?
Getting bottles in hands of people between the form factor and the taste, I think it ends up being a really high repeat purchase because people love the feel in their hand, then they like the way that it tastes. And then you start learning more and thinking more about, again, it being sort of the foundation of everything. And when you decide to be more conscientious about it, it means you're going to drink, hopefully, we hope, a lot more Loonen.
Yeah. I love that you thought about kind of how it feels in your hand because you wouldn't really think, you know what I mean? You think of like the end use and that, but you don't really think about like the full experience, I feel like. And that's probably resonates with consumers from a mindset that they don't even know is a connection, right?
We get a lot of direct comments and feedback on it. Like, we love the spout. It's so nice to drink from. And oh my gosh, it fits in my hand and it feels so nice. And I love the rippling on the bottom of the bottle. And those comments, I just love them because there's a reason that we obsessed over that stuff. And
Yeah.
and it comes from the perspective of like, again, we're not some giant company that's ideating on how we can penetrate a market. It's really just from the perspective of like, this is a product that I want.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that other people are loving it as well.
Yeah, and you're making a full experience out of it. So you mentioned being in restaurants, which I think is an interesting kind of outlet because a lot of times when you think I want to be into retail stores, it's truly, traditional retail. What made you think specifically about restaurant as a mode? I mean, I think that's a great even brand awareness piece, but what made you think specifically about that?
That's where a lot of glass bottled water is, right? And I think particularly from the restaurant perspective, in a world of contracting alcohol consumption, it's really powerful for a lot of our restaurant partners to have a really great high quality water that they can get behind and feel great selling as an alternative to alcohol. And so I think it's sort of this symbiotic relationship where, we can provide a really high quality product that matches the way that a lot of them think about ingredient selection but in the kitchen and how that presents on menu and how their consumer tastes. And then there are little things about our water that are actually really helpful from the perspective of pairing with food. So I mentioned our carbonation on our sparkling product. We actually use it's a quite highly carbonated product, which is helpful with cleansing your palate between bites,
Hmm.
cuts through oil and fat a lot better. But we actually use a bubble breaker, which is basically like a physical agitation to make sure the bubble is really refined and small. And so you don't get like a distended belly like you would when I don't know if you've had carbonated water that has
Mm-hmm.
like the really big bubbles, but like you
Mm-hmm.
kind of feel like full.
Yeah,
And
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
yeah, you don't have that experience with our water. Again, it pairs really well with food on that dimension. And then our minerality is not it's not super highly mineralized. We're sitting at a total dissolved solid span of around 130 to 170. And that just gives a really crisp, clean sip that doesn't really compete with the way that your palate is wine or food or other things that are like a little bit more nuanced.
Interesting. So now that you're in 300 stores on the West Coast, how do you manage making sure from an inventory perspective that you're able to fulfill orders and replenishment?
Yeah, we've had partners who backed us and given us a little bit more flexibility from the perspective of not having to worry as much from a inventory management perspective with capital so that we can really lean into inventory to be able to support some of this expansion and make sure that we're not playing this game of like, okay, we got this PO and now we have to produce
Yeah.
and it's going to be a while longer because our production process takes this long and all that sort of stuff. So we're really grateful for that. We've tried to just be thoughtful about right now in the early stages of our company as we've been seeing a fair amount of growth and inbound interest that we've sort of erred on the side of overproducing rather than underproducing. And as we get into a more stabilized sort of swing of demand over the coming years and it's a little bit more predictable for us, we'll be able to play that balancing game a little bit
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. Can we talk about that? So in December of last year, you were able to get funding of $6 million to support the brands. What made you think about, I'm assuming it's because you came from that side, but why did you think about getting funding to support versus, doing it independently? What was your kind of thoughts around that?
Have we mentioned the fact that it's a hyper competitive, capital intensive category with historically bad margins? Yeah, there's a reason that there's been little to no innovation in the glass set. I think we have the opportunity to build a meaningful business that solves a problem for consumers and that has staying power. But the reality is that at small scale, it's really challenging to get going in this category because it's expensive to get your manufacturing set up. It's expensive to get a glass mold made. It's expensive to ship small quantities. So freight for LTL, it's like expensive. And so like having that support is just, it enables us to do what we're doing.
Yeah. So that I would imagine that's something from the very onset you were thinking of doing as you were
Yeah.
building out the brand. And then especially because you're an expert in that space, how is pitching to get financing different from how you're pitching when it comes to, pitching to a buyer to get your product on shelf?
Yeah, I think there's an underlying similarity across both camps, which is the product has to taste great. The product has to be differentiated in a category that is pretty crowded. And it also just has to have appeal from a brand perspective. And I think that strings together really nicely for us because we've tried to be really thoughtful about all those details. But then as it gets into the nitty gritty of it, buyers care about how we're going to support their store, which is the right thing to care about, right? They care that we're going to come and do demos. They care that we will show up, that we will consistently supply them whenever they need inventory. And that we bring a level of seriousness to the way that we do production and sort of all of our sales collateral and that kind of stuff. Investors care about that, but less in the nitty gritty on like how we think about account by account support and demoing and that sort of stuff, and more about how we think about building the team and executing against a big vision and what that big vision is. So a little bit more on kind of future innovation and how we think about the opportunity ahead of us.
Yeah. And when you talk about execution of strategy, having a co-founder, you talked a little bit up in the beginning about what makes you guys different. How do you separate your roles in regards to building the brand?
Yeah, so David and I, we do a lot of stuff together. I think we both have our lanes, but ultimately we share a lot of the decision making, which, as we continue to grow, might not be quite as manageable because there are more and more decisions to be made these days. But right now, we just have a great partnership. And I think we really value each other as thought partners, and that comes through in the way that we operate as a business and as a team. And we've tried to build a team around us of people who are specialists in what they do, but have a lot of breadth in the way that they do it. So, what I mean by that is like a certain level of grittiness and willingness to roll up their sleeves and do things that maybe aren't in their specific wheelhouse. So every time we launch a market, we do a market blitz with our full team, doing ride alongs with our distributors and going into our customers and talking to store managers and doing demos and all that sort of stuff. And everybody on our team does that. And I think it enables us to stay really close to the product
Hmm.
and the problem that we're solving and knowing what resonates and what doesn't at the store level. And then everybody on our team also is grounded in the vision and the consumer problem that we're trying to solve and why we're doing things the hard way, even though, we think it's the right way to do things,
Right. Yeah.
even though it's a much harder way than the way the rest of the industry does it. And I think holding on to that and like pairing vision with gritty work and being able to jump up and down between those two things is what enables us to do what we do with a small team and limited resources.
Yeah. I love that having your whole team get out to stores because a lot of times when you are behind a computer, you kind of lose the touch of the customer and like what really the end result is when you're building this
Yeah.
brand and how it kind of shows up when it comes to customer experience. So
Yeah. And a
that's great.
reminder that like this isn't going to resonate for everybody
Hmm.
and that's okay, but we got to try,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
I was demoing the other weekend and somebody was like, do you want to try water? And they're like, oh, sorry, I'm too full. I'm like, okay. You literally
It's
any
water,
other excuse is fine.
right?
But it's water. Like you're not too full for water. And there's a certain sort of humility that comes with doing that I think is really important from the perspective of like the way that we think about building the brand and just the reality that sometimes our retailer partners, like, they don't get to have a long form conversation with their customers about every product, right? So, the way that we show up on shelf, the way that we communicate to our customers off shelf, and the way that we help that cycle go so that our retailers have an easier time of it in terms of merchandising our brand and making sure we're hitting great velocities is really important.
Yeah. Have you gotten any consumer feedback that has changed anything in regards to how you deliver product to consumers or how you even show up?
Yeah, we are in the process of redesigning our labeling system. I love our color system. I still love our color system. I think it's just like so fun and delightful, and it is our brand. And I was dogmatic when we launched that consumers would easily read between still and sparkling, even though the label looked identical, except for that word. And now out in the wild, turns out that's super annoying for anybody who's stocking the shelf, for any consumer who's pulling it down.
Yeah.
And even at home in my own refrigerator, I'm like, oh, shoot, that was still not sparkling. So you'll see in the coming months, we're rolling out our sparkling label will be a different color. So the differentiation will be very clear, which I think everybody's excited for.
Even you and your with it in your
Yeah, yeah,
refrigerator.
100%. Yeah.
When you think about your team, how many people currently are on your team?
We're 8 full-time.
8. And who was the first hire? What was the first most important hire for you?
Yeah, our first hire was a little bit atypical, I think, in a normal CPG path, but he's been really foundational to the way that we've built this business to date. And he's our head of commercial. So he does all of our pricing strategy, all of our distributor management. And what that means for us is that we have a consistent margin structure across all of our partners. And he also helps with, all the trade spend promotional planning and how we think about that as it relates to our own margin. I think you can get off on the wrong foot doing a bunch of pocket deals with different potential distributors and retailers, and that creates a lot of problems as you scale from the perspective of just not having a consistent margin profile.
Mhm.
I did not understand why we were hiring that person first.
And now you really get
And now I'm like,
it.
we're geniuses. But he is totally reflective of the archetype of employee that we've brought on since, and our who was really our founding team, this first 8 people, including myself and David, of that like ability to really do in the weeds work, but also see the bigger vision and deliver a work product that lets us fight above our weight.
So, what does growth look like? What is your growth plan as we go into 26 and forward?
It's a lot, we hope. So we've been really focused on California today. We launched with a handful of great retail and on-prem partners in New York. When this airs, it will have been 2 weeks ago. So we're at Meadow Lane, at Croft Alley. We've
I saw
got
your video on Instagram today for Meadow
yeah,
Lane.
we've got a custom drink going live at Matcha Bowl, which is really fun. It's a sparkling, Loonen sparkling with lemonade rhubarb and a shot of matcha on top. So that has been a core focus to date. And then our first national retailers coming online at the end of May, and we're super excited to be more broadly available to folks across the US and when that happens.
Yeah, I'm sure it tastes exceptionally well, exceptionally good.
It's amazing.
So, the biggest question, how has it been going from the investor side to being an entrepreneur in CPG? Was it worth it? Was it all that you expected it to be or not expected it to be?
It's a mix of all of that. I think I'm really, really enjoying it. I love the intellectual rigor of the investing world where you're meeting with really smart, passionate people every day, and learning about what they're doing and learning about the market and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, there's a certain agency that's lacking in the job in the sense that you're a arm's length removed from everything that's being created and built. So I've really, really loved being closer to it, like really close to
Right,
it.
right.
And I'm also just fundamentally a doer. I always have been. My husband jokes that like I relax by folding laundry. And so it just has really aligned with the way that I like to work. And I think it makes it a lot easier to enjoy your day to day when you have a really amazing team that you love hanging out with and a product that you feel really, really passionate about on kind of every level. And it's cool. Like water is a really, really hard category for a multitude of reasons, but it's also one of the only categories that, again, there's no real occasion that water doesn't fit into. And so, particularly living in the Bay Area where we launched, it doesn't get old going into retailers, going into restaurants, going into coffee shops and seeing your product there and then seeing strangers drinking it and enjoying it and obsessing over it. And it's like a total pinch me thing. It's really, really cool to see it out in
Yeah.
the wild.
I think too, like you do hear so many things like how you can change your everyday when it comes to less plastic and to start with just water, which to your point is something you drink every single day. It is definitely, a large part of what you're ingesting into your body is a easy change that doesn't make it so complicated or like, you know,
Yeah.
makes it too complicated to even start one thing because you're like, don't change your this and change your that, and it's
Yeah.
like sometimes I feel like it's a little bit overwhelming, and where do you start? And
It's super overwhelming. Like, I think that's one thing that I really like to empower people with. We write a lot about this on Substack. We have a lot of lists of like stuff that you can do that's super simplistic. And I think the biggest takeaway is the air that you breathe, the water that you drink, the food that you eat. Those are 3 things that you can change out really, really quickly on short order and make impact almost immediately. And then the other stuff, just chip away at it, right? As your laundry detergent runs out, switch to one that maybe doesn't have the stuff you don't want in it. When you're out of cleaning supplies, switch that over. When you're at the end of your makeup, go over to a clean one, right? And like that just makes it easier and less like, oh my God, I can't even get started on this. And then you'll wake up in 6 months and you actually have a day-to-day system that kind of gives you this 80-20 world where you're at home on a day-to-day basis. You're avoiding it for the most part as best you can. And then when you go out, who cares?
Yeah.
Live your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Just taking little bites at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where could our listeners follow, support, and most importantly, buy Loonen Water?
Yeah, so like we mentioned, we're available at select retailers all over California and New York and coming nationally very, very soon. So you can go to our website at loonen.com. That's LOONEN.com and find where all of our retailers are. If we're not at a retailer near you, you can buy us on Amazon and you can follow along at Loonen on social.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Clara, for coming on and telling your journey, your story.
It's really great to chat with you.